My name is Todd Fabricant. I am chairman of the Zero Wire Coalition. I headed up a group of 26 civic groups, which you are a part of, business groups, chambers of commerce. I cannot thank all of you, whether you came to our rallies, you signed up petitions, you showed up at town hall, for the work that you did to stop the project that was going to be almost a 1 million square foot mall. I also wanted to thank some of the civic leaders that served on what we had as called the Alternate Development Committee. The Alternate Development Committee consisted of 14 leaders from around our area, from the school district, the fire district, the civic associations, the chambers, who sat and went through countless developers to find out what we could do and what we would like and what we might feel might be really good for the community. After a 20-year long fight, Oyster Bay Realty came to the table, and they are made up of the Simon Corporation, Castagna Realty, which owns Americana, Manhattan, and Wheatley, and the Albanese organization that has an awful lot of property in Garden City. Those two companies are very local and dear to our hearts. To make a presentation to all of you this evening, that is the beginning. It's a scratch of the surface. I'd like to introduce at this time from the Simon Corporation, Mr. Chuck Davis, Senior Vice President of Development, and thank you all for coming.
My name is Chuck Davis. I'm the Senior Vice President of Development for Simon. And again, just to clarify that this is, I'm here tonight on behalf of the Oyster Bay Development LLC, which is again a partnership of Simon, Castagna, and Albanese. We acquired the town public works site about 18 months ago after a vote of the residents, I think in excess of 70%, vote of the residents of Oyster Bay that they preferred something along the lines of an alternative development versus what was proposed. And then a little over a year ago, we acquired the former Zero Wire site. So there's about 93 acres all total, combined two sites. So yeah, through years of dialogue and resistance and commitment, you all participated in something pretty extraordinary, and that's exercise of land use control at the street, the block, the neighborhood level, and that does not happen very often. You gave a voice to a vision you could see for the property, alternate development, in the form of a smart growth mixed-use project. Supervisor Venditto had much the same vision, and so the commitment of the supervisor and the voice of the community has us bringing forward some of the proposals we have here today. So tonight I'll give you a first look at what we propose to create as an alternative development vision and a mixed-use town center for the site. So this is the first in a series of meetings over the next few months that'll be like these types of meetings. So we're setting them up. We sent out 6,000 mailers, and we basically geographically split kind of certain neighborhoods into one night and then the next night. So we'll have more of those two-night sets coming up, and each time we'll have a little more information. We'll actually adapt some of our initial thoughts based on the comments and feedback we have, and that way, essentially, you all are part of and integral to the design process for what we're going to bring forward. And this is ahead of any formal application to the town. So let's start. I'm going to get back to talking a little bit about mixed use and what does it mean, because it's kind of a broad term, and helping define it, I think, is part of the dialogue. So in a sense, we think it means, and you always see the words live, work, play. It's plastered everywhere. But we also think it means it's a place that can relax and exercise, dine, be entertained, maybe do a little basic shopping, get some basic needs met. But the most important part is the really good ones are really community gathering places. And whether you live or work in that kind of place or just next door, the good ones become your place, an extension of your home and your neighborhood, and an expression of your quality of life. Some of the best examples of these development are really not new at all. They're those pre-automobile villages where you can safely walk to all the places you want to go. And you know many of them. Oyster Bay Hamlet, Cold Spring Harbor. I do want to point out on each of these, up in the corner, the boundaries of our 93-acre site relative to those villages. Roslyn and Garden City, which really I think is formerly known as the very first planned district in America. So we spent the last 9 months or so hashing through every bit of what this can be for our neighbors, friends, and the town citizens of Oyster Bay, and charted our course to create the best place that we could, given the long list of challenges and constraints on these combined sites. So what is just right for this part of Syosset that can add to the quality of life and be economically sustainable for all of you living nearby? So we start with the constraints of the site. What's around us? So we're bordered on one side by the Long Island Expressway and the service road. Needless to say, that's a very interesting frontage. And then you've got the Long Island Railroad, where you have over 100 trains a day that buzz through here. Robbins Lane, this street over here, and right across the street is the state highway maintenance facility. On the back side, you have a little bit of the edge of the drainage basin for around this industrial park, and then you have some homes back here, another little drainage basin, and then the elementary school. So you have a lot of uses that, especially when you look at this older business park here, that are kind of not all in sync with one another necessarily. But what we also say is that you need to look a little bit further out. And when you do, you see really we're the hub of 2,500 to 3,000 homes that are predominantly traditional single-family neighborhoods, and those are your neighborhoods. We think that's the foundation of what we're trying to create here. And then finally, what we can't forget is what the site used to be. Needless to say, this was the old landfill. This is the area that's been covered, and essentially that land cover is kept in place for the last 20 years, the Sarah Wire site, and then the Public Works site. So next, who best to help frame out that vision for us? And there's a lot of architectural firms that can draw plans and buildings, but we didn't want just an architect. Instead, we wanted to choose a firm whose focus is in creating town centers, small and large, across America and even onto other continents. And their careers have been taking that story of traditional walkable mixed-use places forward into the new towns and villages that they're part of, and that have every bit as much continuity and fiber of the original places from the past. So Duany Plater Zyberg, or DPZ, as they're known, has been doing this for over 30 years. From the groundbreaking Seaside project started in the early 80s in Northwest Florida, they've been involved in the Kentlands Master Plan Community, which is in Gaithersburg, Maryland, just out of Washington, D.C., and on up to Mashpee Commons up on Cape Cod, which is still in the process of being developed, and even across the pond to this really interesting, amazing village near the coast in Belgium. These are all new. So they've created these environments that very much feel like the fabric of the character of the places they are, and it's really hearkening back to the way things used to be built. So they've got nearly 300 town centers and city code redos under their belt, and importantly, they have living, breathing, built environments that show what can happen if you follow good patterns of our past to create these places. They're living labs, if you will. But they show you, if they set the foundation right, these places have proven to be every bit as interesting, vibrant, and desirable as when they first came out of the ground, some back as far as 30 years ago. Their projects don't look all the same. They range from tiny locales to whole communities to cities. But they follow the same underlying principles that allow each to find what's just right for that locale. So tonight, we're fortunate to have Andres Duany, one of their principals, and Galina Tachieva leading their team on this effort. And they're both here along with the table in our breakout session so you can see what they've done and why we selected them. Andres is, among other things, a Princeton grad and actually spent part of his early adulthood here in Nassau County. And it was important to us that we hired someone who understood and had a sense of the fabric of the place that you call home. So next, what's the larger regional context? So before we did anything, we looked around at all of these wonderful little hamlets and villages, and then we extended a little bit out to Southampton. We looked across the Sound, and we looked at places like Westport and Greenwich that are really self-sustaining villages of their own. I mean, Greenwich is way too big, but the general sense was that these are places that were really those wonderful places that you like to go to. They weren't just a shopping trip. They were really an experience, and they had all aspects of the quality of your life that you're looking for in those locations. Again, the Kentlands and Mashpee Commons are also solid examples of what they have worked on and continue to work on in the Northeast here. So we all know what was proposed on the site. It was at first 960,000 square feet, then just shy of 900,000 square feet of a standard mall with a parking structure and parking all the way around on the Sarah Wire site. And then you had the town site over here with Public Works and everything that's back there today. Both properties are zoned light industrial, which would allow them to combine to become a large industrial business park, expanding on what exists over here in the north end of the railroad, Our engineers did some quick down and dirty numbers, and you could put nearly 2 million square feet of industrial business park there. An office campus like what you have over where the LIE meets the Jericho Turnpike, where you have the Jericho Quad and the Jericho Plaza, you could add put over 2 million square foot of an office campus here under the current zoning. I don't think that we think either of those is really what should be here. And we honestly don't think that they're, given the impacts that they would have, it's not exactly what we think you will want. But it's what the sites are currently zoned for. So we have to understand that that is the foundation. One of our tables over here allows you to see the by right options in contrast to our proposal, as well as the mall project that was denied with a smaller office piece on the town site. So they'll give you allowed totable area, and they'll also give you the parking count for each one of those. So you can look at those yourself. And we call those single-use alternatives, because they're places you drive to, and then you drive away, typically at rush hour. Then there are other considerations. So like, for instance, say the business and industrial park, you got big freight trucks that would be added on top of the parking for that. So we pulled back. We listened to what we heard prior to the election and going forward, and we dared to dream that big dream, which is to follow a full-fledged mixed-use approach, to look at the pieces of the office, shops, restaurants, entertainment, hotels, and yes, housing, just enough of each to ensure they are successful on their own, but also play off one another to share critical facilities and create a strong sense of place together. And we looked to the town of Oyster Bay Code and got guidance from the town so that we made sure that we were consistent with the intent of the code that the village town center type experiences in Oyster Bay. So again, perhaps the biggest piece of the puzzle is what to do with the former landfill. We could have just embraced a 30-acre surface parking lot, which is what you'd probably have if you had an office or a business park here. But we didn't, and we're proposing something very, very different. A great park. A great public park for the community of Syosset and Jericho. In the assessment of the site and the myriad of issues, Andres and Galina pushed back against treating this as just an afterthought, a negative condition, and said, why don't we embrace that and turn that into something positive? And frankly, that's why we hire people like this. It's simple. And the core of our vision to build everything else in the program you'll see tonight is based upon that premise. So this is our initial vision for Syosset Park, a mixed-use village that fits within the framework of Oyster Bay zoning code, is generally 1 to 3 story for most buildings, except along the expressway and over along the rail line, only because it helps buffer the sound and the noise and the impacts. It kind of preserves the quality of life within the little walking village in the center. Our proposed village is driven by the idea that Great Park creates a positive transition between the adjacent homes and the school, and opens the door for the entire site to our neighbors and Oyster Bay residents, both from an active as well as recreational aspects. And this idea is not just in 2 dimensions. This actually about a 20-foot grade difference from the highest elevation of the landfill site down the Cerro Wire. And we're not going to level it. We're going to keep it there. We're going to keep essentially the walking village with the offices and the hotel down at the lower level, and we're elevating where the residential is. We're tucking in the parking so you can't see it and experience it. And we're going to take these staircases all the way through here to lead people from here on up. Essentially a European-style hill town. That's the type of inspiration we wanted to create, and honestly how a lot of pre-auto villages here in the Northeast were built, because back in the day people didn't level and flatten an entire site to develop it. So what's the makeup of our proposed village? So I'll walk through some of the pieces now. We're proposing a collection of shops, essentially these and essentially the lighter tan up through here, and a handful of what we call one on Long Island type destinations, just enough for the long-term synergy and success. And though we, yes, own Roosevelt Field, Walt Whitman, and Smith Haven at Simon, and you have Americanum and Hassett and Wheatley Plaza, as well as shops over on 7th Street, each of the larger malls in particular dwarf what we propose here several times over. And it's certainly not at all in the character of this proposed village. Matter of fact, there's a little neighborhood across the street here, we can pull it up on some of the aerials, that the length of the one street around this block is essentially the length of that there. This will never be anything like a mall, and it will never sprawl beyond the boundaries of the lines of the site because it's physically constrained on all sides. We at Oyster Bay Development do know retail, and good retail has synergy between the businesses that makes them viable and economically sustainable. And there are special retailers out there who routinely choose these type of walking villages over malls and strip centers. And this is the home that we'd like to create for a few of them. In the aggregate, the shops portion of Syosset Park, which is essentially this loop here, is well less than half even the smallest mall proposal. But with streets and sidewalks and village components and parks and benches and courtyards and those types of experiences, as opposed to a big parking lot and enclosed mall walkway. And just enough to survive and be viable. So we'd like to complement those shops with a variety of dining choices. And we're looking at this whole area along here is all dining along this edge. So we're going to go from essentially our town square component of the project, flip to the next slide, where we'd have patio cafes and things spilling out into an event space and center with outdoor seating as well as some indoor. And then as you come along the edge, larger restaurants with outdoor patios, south-facing patios to enjoy the natural light in those spaces. Then we're also looking at a dine-in or a premium type theater in this area. And actually the combination of the restaurants and the theater, in most retail settings, a lot of ours, it may be 5 to 10% at most of the total makeup. Here it's going to be about 25%, and why? Because traffic shows up to these places typically 7 o'clock or later in the evening, and they leave later. They typically are not, if you will, packing up your streets and your roads at the rush hour time in the evening. So we're even being very careful and thoughtful about the things that we're bringing to make sure that they're at distributed peak times and not everybody coming in and leaving at once. So the core village we're going to call the shops at Syosset Park. We also have a little bit of, I'll call it a veneer of shops and services, but something more like a small boutique grocer that allows the people to work here, stay here, live in the nearby, to be able to have those services very close by without having to get in a car, drive on the expressway, or head off much further abreast. We also are proposing a small office campus here. That's shown as about 200,000 square feet in 2 buildings and parking for it. To give you context, again, the Jericho Quad and Jericho Plaza across the street are almost 1.6 million square feet, and they're looking to add another building. So this will be 10% at most of what you have at that intersection. And why it's of interest and value to us is because the parking that supports it, and what happens in most office parks? What happens to their parking nights and weekends? You could roll a bowling ball and not hit anything through it, right? So you can go back to the site plan. It is conveniently right across from the restaurants and the theater. So at nights and weekends, when these are the most parking intensive and people are coming here, you all of a sudden have opened up a whole additional component of parking, which means they're not spreading out and spilling all over the place. You're keeping them tight within the village. So it's essentially shared parking. It's shared parking, and instead of being used from 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, it really becomes a 24/7 type parking opportunity and extends essentially the life of the businesses that count on parking in particular. So that's the office portion. Our office advisors are telling us that that size is the minimum to attract a Class A corporate office type tenant here. We're going to be very picky. We're going to be looking to make sure it's somebody that has that signature name, that's something that's going to be proud to have there, and people are going to create the synergy and help out some of the shops and the businesses here, help out some of the restaurants during the day to make sure, again, it's long-term sustainable and viable. And we are going to call this the offices at Syosset Park. Then the last piece that we're looking at here is hotels, and we would look at a select service boutique hotel and then a business hotel next, and then a parking deck that partially supports them, but also supports this end of the village. And you wonder, why hotels? Well, I mean, for instance, 7th Street and the Garden City Hotel, what a great amenity. And there's a lot of synergy between, especially the dining, the shops, and the businesses there. But there's an even more important reason. As opposed to, say, 4 office buildings along here, just 2 office buildings and having these hotels, these don't drive anywhere near the morning and the evening rush hour traffic that this does. Sure, you'll have people who will come here, and some may come here during the regular hours, but for the most part, it's people who are coming in the night or they're leaving. Add to that Now all of a sudden they have dining, things that they can do here, even get up in the morning and go running in the trail. They have a lot more reasons to stay, if you will, on campus or on the site, as opposed to coming in and out all day long. This type of environment, there are hotels who are already interested. We have hotels in our portfolio across the country. We know that there's interest here, but they only want to be in this type of a setting. So you're going to get a better cadre and mix of the tenant type of the hotel product that we think that we can bring to the property. So between the villages, the shops, the dining, the theater, the market, service uses, offices, hotels, we think we have the optimal synergy. Parking is optimized. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 compact decks. The reason we have those is because we don't want to fill this whole thing up with parking lot, which we'll go into in a little bit later. And the magic is really the transitions between. And this is where I think is one of the benefits to the broader community. If you have an office park, how many of you say is, let's go hang out and have a picnic on that 15-foot landscape strip around that office building over there? Those spaces, the parking lots and the green belts around your office parks and business parks are really not yours. They're essentially that office campuses, and they really kind of like that taboo. You don't go into that area. That's different here. You actually get to use all these spaces. They're yours. When was the last time that you went to a shopping and dining destination that when it wasn't your primary purpose of going? You go in, you go buy your stuff, you leave. The spaces created here become your any hour of the day extended place, hopefully to add to your quality of life and add to the values of your community. I don't think we think a mall or an office park or industrial park does it quite the way we would propose to do it here, and that's just some food for thought. So again, look at the alternatives table, see how a mixed-use village takes up about a third of our land and has between 600 and 650,000 square foot of total non-residential uses plus the 350 hotel rooms. The alternatives are in the 2 million, low 2 million square feet of industrial park or office park. And obviously, what you've already rejected, about a 900,000 square foot mall plus another 800,000 square foot of office is ultimately on the town site if it were built out. So just the difference in the parking requirements on that table we think is astounding, but we ask you to take a look at that and weigh that for yourself. So this leads us to the residences at Syosset Park. And in many mixed-use projects, you'll see a heavy dose of mid-rise, fairly tall residential towers over the top of shops. And we knew that this wasn't the right fit for here. So what would make sense and what would create a walkable, viable neighborhood experience? Be just substantial enough to have enough sense of a community for those that might live here. And another reason we brought DPZ to the program, because they're not cookie-cutter planners. And the character of the residential aspect of a town center is every bit as important, if not more important, than the non-residential pieces. And they get this. And if you look at the nearby neighborhoods and hamlets and villages that are idyllic in Long Island, you see that those people who live close by, they have a pretty amazing quality of life. So what DPZ and our market support firm have laid out for us is the potential, what we think is very idyllic, and the proper mix of housing that allow young couples, starting families, and empty nesters to live here and fit in just under the size of the adjacent single-family neighborhoods, both in terms of size and cost. So we propose an array of condominium suites, all with views around the green and the park and the edge. Then we have flats over here, essentially all looking into a large courtyard back to the village, and small and large townhouses that all fill in here with their own garages. And then we have a small lot detached village as you transition back over towards Abbey Lane. And I'll pull up the next picture. I call this my Thank You, Angela Lansbury and Murder, She Wrote. But essentially it's cottage type experience, environment which I think is a nice, better, softer transition over to Abbey Lane and over into the single family neighborhoods of Syosset Groves. So the limited exception of those homes that aren't greens and parks and those is actually along our boulevard edge. That's along this edge right here. And the approach there is more of a mixed-use approach. So all of the detached homes and the townhomes, all of these, roughly half of the units here will have their own two-car garage. And they're all fed off of an alley network. So they'll have streets with parallel parking on them. That's all of the lighter blue. But all of this dark blue is an alley network. So you access your garage for your home off of an alley. You don't have a garage off or a driveway off your front. It's front porches, it's green, it's open. It's a little bit more like old school houses from before the 30s and 40s when everybody had alleys. Somehow we changed that and we put big garages as people's front doors. This is going back, I would say, more to the more traditional setting. In addition to that, the flats and the condo suites, we're actually putting parking underground underneath them. So they come in, they park, they come up into their building, they all have views. There's a little bit of guest parking around the edge that's actually dedicated for the residences because we don't want to have people who are going down here to compete and take away guest parking. We don't want to create that confusion. So we're creating an ability to get to guest parking on the fringe and in these neighborhoods. Because the reality is if you don't have driveways and your two-car garages in the back, where are your friends going to park when they want to come visit? This is actually in excess what the town code is. The town code is for sale houses, it's 2 parking spaces per unit, and that's supposed to cover guest parking. But we're trying to be realistic. And then again, talking about this last bit, which is essentially the street edge, and this is where the transition is. I'll call it from the main shops district along the street. We're actually going to bridge with 1- and 2-story townhouses here before you step up into the neighborhood. And so they essentially, if you will, have eyes on the street and create a little more interest. So you have this edge here and then some 1 and possibly a little bit of 2-story this side. And we think that help breaks it. It's not 4, 5, 6 stories. We're really adhering to the spirit and the intent of the primary, no more than 3-story expectation. So it's decidedly suburban versus an urban approach to mixed use. And we've projected will take 4, 5, maybe even 6 years to build all these homes. They don't all sell at once. They are all for sale. David Simon himself does not think that this type of village works, and honestly, most of us agree that it does not work if it's all primarily or even all age-restricted housings. What great small town or village can you think of that is senior-only housing? Maybe huge retirement communities in Florida, Arizona, not too many. We believe the variety of home types will allow people to choose what best fits their needs and what they can afford at any age. And we want to make this as vibrant as possible for every age group. And as with the cycle of families, so we see opportunities to buy into Syosset here for those who cannot afford a large single-family home today, and allow this to be a bridge for those starting off here to step into your neighborhoods as kids come along and they decide they need a larger home and a yard. And then as the kids leave the nest, this place can allow some of you the opportunity to trade back without leaving your community, family, or friends when you don't need or want that big house and yard. But then you can walk down the alleyway, pop down, and get a coffee. So offices, shops, dining, theater, hospitality on about 1/3 of the site, about 30% of it. A variety of homeowner options on another 30% of it. And this is all essentially dwarfed by the by right alternatives of 2 to 2.5 million square feet of office or industrial park uses, and honestly results in far less traffic into and out of the property. So again, you can just compare just the parking numbers alone. And I think again we ask you to give that some thought. So then finally, on top of the parkettes, neighborhood greens, courtyards, plazas, and all of those components in the village itself, the last 30 acres is set aside as a great park. It's 30 usable acres, or about 40% of the total property when you include the parking on the edge that supports the park. So what is 30 usable acres? Well, we have a table in the back where we've actually superimposed a large chunk, 75 to 80% of Westbury Gardens could fit on the site, or several smaller local parks could all fit on the site. So you can actually see and look at the area of those pictures just to get a sense of how big that is. But I think here's another piece of the story is we're not going to design it for you. We want you to take an active role with the town's guidance, and we're turning over the park design to the users. And we'll build it as a public park for everyone, not just the people who live and work here at Syosset Park. And we think that's a far better fit than a large parking lot for an office campus or an industrial park, and certainly better than what's there today. So we think it enhances the quality of life for the people buying homes here, as well as for the existing homeowners who today back up to the town public works site. And understand we only drew the fields on such, go back to the last site, one before that. We only drew the fields here as a representation so you can understand and get a grasp of the size and the opportunity. It's a 30-acre blank slate. So please share your thoughts and questions at the park table. Also, please go to the Facebook page and the website that we've set up here, syossetpark.com, that goes live tomorrow. And we would encourage you and your kids, or your grandparents, or your parents, to share your ideas of what you think is appropriate for a community park of this size. So we've studied all the prior proposals for the site, especially as to traffic circulation into and out and around the site, and our proposal takes the best idea of those from those past studies as to what can be done to direct most of the traffic to Miller Lane and to the LIE Northern Parkway points of access for those who don't live right adjacent to it. And we looked at ways we can ensure Robbins Lane works optimally for getting into and out of Syosset Park conveniently and safely for locals, as well as bypass needs for some of you just wanting to get across the rail line and down to the LIE without getting caught here. We want to make it easily accessible for you, the locals. And for those coming from a distance, it's pretty simple. We're going to pull them in off of this direction off of Miller. This is a 2-lane but 1-way continuous loop all the way around. And it takes them back out, and we'll have a signal here that allows them to head on their way this way or this way. They don't have to make any left or right turns. That's essentially the primary route that we're going to direct all of, if you will, the through traffic. Now, we'll still have access to these points for people coming through this way. We'll create a double left turn here. We won't let them make the turn here. We'll give plenty of room for people to get here, and we'll add additional lane through this way to bypass all of that. For people coming out, you won't be able to make a left turn and clog this up. You have to come here to make a left turn out. So these become really the local secrets where everybody knows that's what they're supposed to do. And anybody who is coming from Massapequa or further, they come this way, they're going to go this way, they're going to head out, and they're going to go home. So coupled with the mix he uses and minimizing what we think is the heftiest rush hour traffic, in other words, like an office park, we think we're dramatically reducing the potential traffic-related impacts here versus those single-use by right alternatives. But again, we ask you to weigh that for yourself. And considering all the things you need to have on property, further reduces the traffic movements that you'd have versus if, say, these were individual properties lined up next to each other, kind of in Westbury, Garden City along Old Country Road. So what does that mean? The office employees, they don't have to get in their car to go out to lunch or to pick up a few things before, during, or after work. For hotel guests, they don't have to leave the village to go to a restaurant or see a movie or get up and go run for a jog in the morning in the park. And for the residences who live here, not having to get in a car to go get basic groceries or pick up an extension cord. It doesn't happen very often, except in those original walkable village and hamlet centers that exist here. So certainly not along the retail boulevards that have kind of been built since the 40s and 50s that crisscross much of Long Island, where the parking lots of adjacent businesses don't even connect. Again, something we ask you to think about. So again, 1/3 of the site was set aside for public park uses, but we see it's more than just, if you will, fields and the like. You could have not only your tournaments, but pumpkin patches and the like, and perhaps a home for farmers markets or marketplaces, places for holiday celebrations. Even component elements might have for a wedding type of a setup in this location. And we could have, again, paved it, but we think creating this charming, walkable, and more tight, compact, more expensive to build parking, and freeing this up is really what we think the best way to bridge and have this become that nice little nugget of a town center, but really embrace everybody around here with a great public benefit. And really, in our minds, enhance the surrounding Jericho and Syosset community beyond just your fantastic school districts. So again, it's not an office park, it's not an industrial business park, and it is absolutely not a mall. So let's talk about timing. You all have spent about 2 decades challenging what had been proposed before. So we didn't come to you presenting something we felt would be way out of sync from the best of the other alternative development, if you will, existing mixed-use villages on Long Island, or that we did not intend to deliver on if we have your support of something like what's proposed. We took direct guidance and we listened to town officials early on in our dialogue with them what was acceptable and what was not before they would even consider a proposal. And their primary guidance, the primary guidance from the supervisor was bring this mixed-use idea back and work with the community. Solicit their feedback, then bring it into the town for consideration. And that's what we're doing. So again, this would still be a long-term plan to implement. We have town planning and environmental reviews to go through, secret documentation. We have town board consideration, then afterwards we have to go to the county for subdivision processing and additional approvals. We have to work with the local utility providers and other federal, state, and local government authorities just to review and process the plan. Then we get to start drawing building plans, and then we get to process those through the town building department and other jurisdictions just to pull permits. So it's going to be a number of years before we even get the first phase open. And that's reality. Even if everybody here said, let's do it today, that's reality. It's still going to be a number of years before the first phase is open. And needless to say, especially with all of this for sale housing, it's a multi-year patient build-out. What I can tell you is will be our intent to deliver the park in the very first phase, as long as we can work with the town on their transition for their facilities to other locations in town. And we know once they have a plan they know the community can embrace, with a solid financial basis the project can deliver, which will provide a much-needed tax boost that this town needs. They are prepared to move on that front, and we think this has the bones potentially to be that project. So again, that's our vision. We hope tonight's the start of a healthy dialogue with you and our neighbors. We intend to come back sometime middle May and have a further discussion with you all, explore some of the issues that are brought up tonight, and get into more detail on certain of the pieces. But really, this is an introduction. There's so much here. To try to run through it all in one night is just irresponsible, and it's not very respectful to you. We also have, again, a website that goes live tomorrow and a Facebook page that went live as of last Thursday, so you're absolutely welcome to use that as a forum for questions and thoughts. And again, we'll expect to have at least another set of meetings in June, and then we'll see what happens after that. If some of your friends and neighbors are not able to be here tonight, we'll do a brief summation at the next set of meetings at the start, so they get a smaller version of this up front and they can catch up. And a lot of these materials will be immediately posted on the Facebook page and the website, so all of the images and the things here and the site plans will be available for the public to look at. We're trying to be very transparent. We may not have answers to every question or agree with every suggestion, but we'll make the effort and we'll be responsive and forthcoming. We'll listen. We'll take the important resonating thoughts that come out of the community process and we'll integrate that to the degree we can so that this becomes a reflection of your community and neighborhoods. But also understand we bought the town property and former Sarah Wire site to finally do something great with them, commensurate with the premium cost to buy the land and to ensure to you at a traditional enclosed mall or something perhaps even less of what you'd like would not be built here. And we believe what we're proposing is a mixed-use alternative development that we think is right and something that 50, 100 years from now will be just as interesting as the day it's completed and ensure really solid property values for everyone who lives nearby, as you see around those wonderful little hamlets of Oyster Bay, Roslyn, Cold Spring Harbor, and even Garden City. So we'd like to build something like this. So let's roll up our sleeves and let's work together. Thank you.